In September 2004, one of the most experienced wilderness experts on Earth vanished without a trace in the remote forests of Canada's Yukon territory. When rescuers finally discovered what was left behind, nothing made sense. His food was untouched. His weapon was still standing where he had left it. There were no signs of a struggle. And scattered across the forest floor were clues that continue to fuel one of the most disturbing mysteries ever to emerge from the North American wilderness. Some believe he died in a tragic accident. Others blame a predator. But those who have studied the evidence closely believe something far stranger may have been waiting for him in the trees. This is the story of Bart Schlier. And before it's over, you'll understand why many people believe the wilderness may be hiding something we still don't understand. Long before his disappearance became a mystery, Bart Schlier had already become a legend among wildlife professionals. Born in 1955 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, Bart developed an unusual fascination with animals at a very young age. While most children were busy with ordinary hobbies, he spent his time studying wildlife behavior, tracking animals, and learning everything he could about the natural world. To Bart, animals weren't simply creatures to observe. They were puzzles to understand. His father recognized that passion early. Hunting trips became lessons about respect, patience, and the connection between humans and nature. One lesson stayed with Bart for the rest of his life. The purpose of being in the wild wasn't about killing animals. It was about understanding them. That philosophy would shape every decision he made. As he grew older, Bart became known not only for his intelligence but also for his relentless determination. He excelled academically, competed successfully in wrestling, and eventually earned a master's degree in wildlife biology from Montana State University. Even among future scientists, Bart stood out. Professors described him as someone who seemed to know every living thing around him: birds, mammals, trees, flowers, shrubs. His knowledge wasn't limited to textbooks. He lived it. For his graduate research, Bart spent months deep inside Yellowstone's rugged backcountry studying grizzly bears. Most researchers observed from a distance. Bart got close. Very close. He became skilled at locating, capturing, and tracking some of the most dangerous animals in North America. The wilderness wasn't something he feared. It was where he felt most comfortable. That reputation only grew over time. For 14 years, Bart worked with grizzly bear research teams throughout Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. He spent countless months isolated in remote mountain regions where most people would never willingly travel. Friends often joked that difficult conditions seemed to energize him. The harsher the environment became, the happier Bart appeared. Then came an opportunity that would take him halfway around the world. In the early 1990s, renowned wildlife researchers invited Bart to help study Siberian tigers in Russia. Without hesitation, he accepted. For nearly a decade, he worked in some of the coldest and most unforgiving wilderness areas on Earth. His job involved locating, capturing, sedating, and tracking the largest cats on the planet. It was dangerous work. But Bart excelled at it. His expertise eventually took him across Asia, assisting conservation projects involving some of the world's most feared predators. At one point, he was even called to help capture a tiger responsible for attacking humans. The assignment was expected to take weeks. Bart completed it in days. His reputation became legendary among wildlife professionals. Yet despite everything he accomplished, those who knew him best rarely heard him talk about his achievements. He remained humble, quiet, focused entirely on the work. Eventually, life brought him north to Canada's Yukon territory. The vast forests, rugged mountains, and untouched wilderness seemed perfectly suited for someone like Bart. By 2003, he had become a licensed hunting guide and was already earning respect throughout the region. Clients trusted him. Researchers admired him. Friends considered him one of the most capable outdoorsmen they had ever met. And that's exactly why what happened next is so difficult to explain. Because if anyone knew how to survive alone in the wilderness, it was Bart Schlier. Yet just 1 year after arriving in the Yukon, he would disappear under circumstances that remain unsolved to this day. On September 14, 2004, Bart boarded a float plane headed toward Reed Lakes, a remote area hidden deep within the Yukon wilderness. The location was isolated beyond belief. No roads. No nearby communities. No easy way in or out. For most people, reaching the area would be nearly impossible. For Bart, it was simply another adventure. He packed enough supplies to remain there for 2 weeks. Food. Camping gear. A camera. An inflatable boat. And the handmade bow he carried almost everywhere. After landing on the lake, the pilot unloaded the equipment and prepared to leave. The aircraft lifted off the water and disappeared beyond the mountains. As the sound of the engine faded into silence, Bart found himself completely alone. Miles from civilization. Surrounded by endless forest. Exactly where he wanted to be. At least, that's how the story begins. What happened next would become one of the strangest wilderness mysteries ever documented. Because somewhere in those silent forests, something changed. And 2 weeks later, when the float plane returned to collect him. Bart Schlier was gone. When the float plane returned on September 27, something immediately felt wrong. The pilot circled above Reed Lakes, expecting to see Bart waiting near the shoreline. There was no sign of him. No signal. No movement. Nothing. For an average camper, a delay might not have been alarming. But Bart Schlier was not an average camper. He was disciplined, organized, and exceptionally reliable. If he wasn't standing at that pickup point, something had happened. Authorities were notified, and a search operation was launched. At first, investigators believed the explanation would be simple. Perhaps Bart had decided to hike toward the highway. Maybe he had become delayed by weather. Possibly an injury. But as search teams began examining the area, those theories quickly started falling apart. The first thing they found was Bart's campsite. A meal sat exactly where it had been left. Food remained inside the cooking pot. Nothing appeared disturbed. It looked as if he had planned to return at any moment. Then investigators located his inflatable boat farther down the shoreline. And nearby, they discovered something even stranger. Bart's bow. His quiver of arrows. And a dry bag filled with supplies. All of it carefully positioned beside a tree. Nothing scattered. Nothing damaged. Nothing suggesting panic or violence. The scene looked almost peaceful. As if Bart had simply stood up and walked away. But everyone who knew him understood one thing. Bart would never voluntarily abandon critical gear in the wilderness. Especially not in grizzly country. Not his radio. Not his bear spray. Not his hunting equipment. Those items weren't luxuries. They were survival tools. And yet they remained exactly where he had left them. As the search widened, investigators began uncovering more clues. A camouflage face mask. A baseball cap. Pieces of clothing. Small fragments of bone. Each discovery raised more questions than answers. Then came the find that transformed a missing person case into a mystery. Searchers located part of a human skull resting on the forest floor. The damage was severe. Authorities later confirmed the remains belonged to Bart Schlier. But what shocked investigators wasn't simply the discovery itself. It was the condition of the evidence. Only a portion of Bart's remains were recovered. The majority of his body was never found. His boots were missing. His jacket was missing. Much of his clothing had vanished. And despite extensive searches, the forest refused to give up any more answers. Almost immediately, one explanation emerged. A bear attack. The Yukon is home to large populations of grizzly bears, and animal activity had been detected in the area. To many officials, the conclusion seemed straightforward. A predator had killed Bart. Case closed. But the people who understood wildlife best weren't convinced. In fact, many believed the evidence pointed in the opposite direction. Because nearly everything about the scene contradicted a typical bear attack. To understand why, you have to understand what a grizzly attack normally looks like. Grizzly encounters are violent. Extremely violent. The aftermath is usually chaotic. Vegetation becomes damaged. The ground is disturbed. Clothing is shredded. Clear evidence of a struggle is often present. But none of that appeared here. The area surrounding Bart's remains consisted largely of soft forest moss. the kind of surface that records movement easily. Yet investigators reported very little evidence of a struggle. No obvious signs of a desperate fight. No major disturbance to the terrain. No trail indicating a prolonged attack. That alone raised eyebrows. Then came another troubling detail. According to reports, specialists examining the recovered skull found damage consistent with massive blunt force trauma. But there were reportedly no obvious signs typically associated with predatory bites. No clear tooth punctures. No unmistakable feeding marks. No evidence that perfectly matched the behavior expected from a grizzly. The more experts studied the scene, the less certain they became. And then there was the food. This detail continues to trouble many researchers. Food remained at Bart's camp. Additional supplies remained near his hunting position. Yet neither appeared heavily disturbed. Anyone familiar with bears knows food is often one of the first things they investigate. Especially in remote wilderness settings. Why would a predator ignore multiple food sources nearby? Why leave supplies untouched? Why remove only certain items while leaving others behind? None of it seemed to fit together. As weeks passed, alternative explanations began emerging. Could Bart have suffered a medical emergency? Perhaps he collapsed unexpectedly. But that theory struggled to explain the severe injuries. Others suggested a human attacker. Yet that possibility appeared equally unlikely. Very few people even knew Bart's location. Reaching Reed Lakes required extraordinary effort. There was no obvious motive. No evidence of another person's presence. And no signs of a confrontation. One by one, the conventional explanations started breaking down. But the strangest discovery had yet to be fully discussed. Because among the items recovered during the investigation was Bart's camera. And according to accounts that would later circulate among researchers and wilderness enthusiasts, the contents of that camera introduced a completely new layer to the mystery. A layer that continues to fuel debate more than 2 decades later. Inside were images reportedly taken during Bart's final days. Images suggesting he may have encountered something unusual before his disappearance. Something he considered important enough to document. And what those images allegedly showed would become the foundation for theories far more unsettling than bears, accidents, or human violence. The deeper investigators looked into Bart Schlier's final days, the more the case seemed to drift away from ordinary explanations. Because if the camera reports were accurate, then Bart may have realized he wasn't alone long before he vanished. He just may not have understood what was watching him. As the investigation continued, attention eventually turned toward one of the most intriguing pieces of evidence recovered from the wilderness. Bart's camera. According to accounts that later circulated among researchers, outdoorsmen, and those who followed the case closely, the camera contained material that has never been fully explained. One image reportedly showed a series of unusually large footprints along the shoreline near the lake. What made the photograph significant wasn't merely the size of the tracks. It was the fact that Bart had chosen to photograph them at all. Remember who we're talking about. This was not an inexperienced hiker. This was a wildlife biologist with decades of field experience. A man who had spent most of his life interpreting tracks, signs, and animal behavior. For someone like Bart to stop and document tracks suggested they had captured his attention for a reason. Whether that reason was unusual size, shape, or something else entirely remains unknown. But the photograph became one of the most discussed details in the entire case. Then came the second claim. A short video clip. Only a few seconds long. Reports described a dark, human-shaped figure appearing near the edge of the forest before disappearing among the trees. The footage has never provided definitive answers. Some believe it showed nothing more than a shadow or natural visual distortion. Others remain convinced it captured something unusual. Whatever the truth may be, the clip only added fuel to an already growing mystery. And that mystery becomes even more fascinating when viewed against the backdrop of the region itself. The Yukon Territory contains some of the largest stretches of untouched wilderness remaining in North America. Thousands of square miles of dense forest. Remote mountains. Hidden valleys. Areas so isolated that a person can travel for days without encountering another human being. For generations, indigenous communities throughout the North have shared stories about mysterious beings said to inhabit these wilderness regions. Descriptions vary between cultures and locations. But many stories speak of large human-like figures living deep within the forests, rarely seen and rarely understood. These accounts existed long before modern media, long before internet forums, and long before popular television shows introduced such legends to mainstream audiences. Over time, many people began connecting those traditional stories with modern reports of Sasquatch. Whether those connections are accurate remains a subject of debate. But they became impossible to ignore in discussions surrounding Bart's death. Supporters of the Sasquatch theory point toward several details: the reported footprints, the alleged figure in the video, the unusual injuries, the lack of a clear explanation, and perhaps most importantly, the fact that an experienced wilderness expert seemingly disappeared without any opportunity to defend himself. To believers, those details form a pattern. A pattern suggesting Bart may have encountered something unknown. Skeptics strongly disagree. They argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And despite decades of speculation, no conclusive proof has ever emerged linking Sasquatch to Bart's disappearance. In truth, both sides face the same problem. The evidence is incomplete. Too much is missing. Too many questions remain unanswered. What exactly happened near Reed Lakes? Why were only partial remains recovered? What caused the catastrophic damage to the skull? Why was so much equipment left behind? And if a predator was responsible, why did the scene fail to resemble many known predatory attacks? Even after all these years, nobody can answer those questions with certainty. The official case remains unresolved. No definitive cause of death has ever silenced the debate. No discovery has closed the mystery. And somewhere within the vast wilderness of the Yukon, many believe crucial answers may still remain hidden. Perhaps buried beneath years of snowfall. Perhaps lost forever among forests that reveal only what they choose to reveal. What makes this story so haunting is not simply the mystery itself. It's the men at the center of it. Bart Schlier wasn't reckless. He wasn't inexperienced. He wasn't someone likely to make a fatal mistake in the wilderness. If anything, he was exactly the kind of person most would expect to survive almost any situation nature could create. Yet even he vanished under circumstances that continue to puzzle investigators, wildlife experts, and mystery researchers alike. Maybe there is a perfectly ordinary explanation waiting to be discovered. Maybe one critical piece of evidence has simply never been found. Or maybe Bart stumbled into something far stranger than anyone realizes. Something hidden deep within one of the wildest regions on Earth. A place where silence dominates the landscape. Where ancient forests stretch beyond the horizon. And where, even today, some people still believe they are being watched. More than 20 years have passed since Bart Schlier entered the Yukon wilderness. But his final days remain trapped inside a story with no ending. A story written in footprints, unanswered questions, and a forest that never gave him back. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all. Whatever happened to Bart Schlier may still be out there. Waiting in the trees.